But the story of Joseph is very intriguing. In fact, it became a Broadway play, Joseph's Technicolor Dreamcoat. I think it was Donny Osmond that played Joseph. So anyway, have you ever been falsely accused?
Yes, amen.
Yeah, I think if you have been, it doesn't take long to remember when you were. Or have you ever taken a stand for something that was right and suffered for it?
Yes, amen.
Yeah, because that's what happened to Joseph. I told you last week that when I was in the 8th grade, I got kicked off the track team, and I told you I couldn't remember why, but I did remember now. It was because I was accused of smoking. And back in the day, the junior high or the middle school, I guess, was at Henry Hill. And, we had our services at Henry Hill for a few years, so you all know where that is. And so the track coach, the first day of track practice, he said, I want you guys to just take off. And he said, go out and run down to that Corvallis Highway, out by the bridge. And then he said, run out to Stapleton Road. And back in those days, it was all gravel. And so we ran out to Stapleton Road and then came to Talmadge Road. That was a gravel road. And then we just cut across Farmers Fields and went back to Henry Hill. And so somewhere along the way, a buddy of mine, well, when we got back to Henry Hill, the coach said, I need to talk to you. And I said, what's going on? He said, well, I heard you and your buddy were smoking. And I said, no. In fact, we were gasping for air, but it wasn't because we were smoking. It was because we were running. And he said, well, Gary said that he saw you and your buddy smoking. And so I said, well, Coach, that is not true. But Gary was a pretty credible guy. I knew Gary. He actually went to church, same church I did, and we had been friends from when we were little. And so I went over to Gary. I said, Jerry, why did you say you saw me smoking? He says, because I did. And he thought he did. I don't know what he saw. I don't know what he was smoking. But he saw something and thought it was me. So anyway, eventually that led to me getting kicked off the track team. So I know that's a small thing, but I think we all know what it's like to be falsely accused. You've all seen documentaries now of prisoners that went to jail for years and then later found out that they'd been falsely accused. The DNA evidence has set them free. And so it's an atrocity of justice. But that's what Joseph was facing. And I think sometimes we forget that. But we can identify with that. It's just not fair. So number 1 in your notes there says, sometimes we are called to suffer for taking a stand for what we know is right. And remember, Joseph took a stand he did the right thing. He was falsely accused of sexual harassment. And that's a very powerful thing in our day. It certainly was in his day as well. Joseph was morally right. And he stood up for morality, but he suffered serious consequences. And let's just look at there in Genesis 39 what it says in the scriptures. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. It came about after these events that his master's wife, we're talking about Potiphar here, his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph. And she said, lie with me. But he refused. So he did the right thing, right? He stood up for morality. But verse 11, it says, but it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment. Now, if you study the life of Joseph, you know that he got in trouble a couple of times because of his garment, because of his coat. And, I think maybe Joseph finally learned, I don't want any more coats. We're going to be in a lot of trouble. But anyway, he had it, and she got it. She caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand. Okay, not a good idea. And fled and ran outside. Now that was the good idea. He fled from evil, ran outside. So she kept the garment with her until his master, Potiphar, came home. And so it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, "Your servant did to me after this manner," that Potiphar, his anger was aroused. And then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison. Now, if you read this story carefully, you'll see that Potiphar had a very high position in Egypt. He was head of what we would call the Secret Service, the bodyguards of the Pharaoh. These were top-notch guys, and so that was who Potiphar was. And so he had an in with the whole prison system, and he made sure that Joseph got in there, and they threw away the key. So anyway, there's some background there that sometimes we are called, just like Joseph, to take a stand for what is right, and especially in this day and age. If we're going to take a stand for Christ and for what the Bible teaches, there could be some consequences, more than in the past, perhaps. All right, number 2. When we are falsely accused or take a stand for right and suffer for it, we receive a special blessing and favor from God if we truly thank God for the trial. And you know that Joseph had God's favor. We've talked about this before, that when he took over in Potiphar's house, he ran the whole place. Potiphar turned it over to him. He trusted him. And everything that Joseph touched seemed to turn to gold. It tells us in Genesis 39, 21 to 23. But the Lord was with Joseph. Now this is when he's in prison. And showed him mercy, because he was falsely accused, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Now, Brad used to be the keeper of the prison when he was working out at OSCI. And so he knows what it's like to work with prisoners. And most of them aren't very trustworthy, but Joseph was. Anyway, verse 22, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Now, wouldn't you love to have that whatever you did, whatever you undertook, God would make it prosper? And some of you do that. If God is working in your life, you have the favor of the Lord, and it's a great thing. So we get a blessing when we suffer for what is right, and that was true of Joseph. 1 Peter 3 puts it this way, but even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. So there is a blessing when we suffer for doing what is right. And God can turn what seems like a bad thing into a very good thing. That's Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. So when Joseph got thrown in prison, that was a bad thing. He was falsely accused. Can you imagine? But he was able to thank God even for that. And because of that, God was able to bless him. And that's a tough thing to do, but that's what God wants us to do as well. All right, moving right along today. Number 3. God tests us by putting us in charge of something small. If we are good stewards, he rewards us with bigger things to manage. Now, this is probably the main point of what we want to look at today. It's God tests us with little things, and he wants to see if we're going to be faithful, if we're going to be good stewards, if we will do our job, take care of whatever it is. If we do, he will bless us with bigger things to manage. It says so in Matthew 25:21. And this is that parable of the talents. You'll remember it. And at the end, his Lord said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Why? "You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things." And this is a principle that is true in life. Whether you're a Christian or not, if we are faithful in just a few things, then we will be put in charge of more things. And if we're faithful there, then we get more responsibility. This was true of Joseph. Remember when he started out, he was only 17 years old. And his father said, "Hey, Joseph, here's your job. I want you to go out and check on the brothers. See how they're doing. See if are they managing the sheep right? Or how's it going with them? Have any of them died? How's it going with the brothers? Are they getting along with each other, or are they fighting like they usually do?" So Joseph had this task of going out and bringing back a report to his father. His father trusted him. He gave him this little job to do, and Joseph didn't do it so well. Joseph didn't understand how to relate to other people. And remember, he had that problem with pride. And so he kind of failed that test that God gave to him. And he had to spend some time in the pit. And while he was there, he came to his senses, I believe. And that he learned from his mistakes. And he thought, next, if I ever get a chance to do this again, I'm going to relate better to people. And so then he got sold into slavery. He was given more responsibility with Potiphar. Potiphar was, like I said, he was head of the Secret Service. And he had a big place. He had an acreage. He had several servants in his house. And Joseph was put in charge of all this. I imagine there were crops that were growing. He had a farm. And so Joseph was in charge of all this. And it worked out great. He had systems in place so that the farm was successful. It was profitable. And Potiphar was so pleased with it, he just put everything into Joseph's charge, including his own wife. And he just trusted him so much. And so Joseph was given more responsibility. Well, because of that, he got a promotion to prison. How about that? Well, that wasn't a pleasant thing, but Joseph saw it. He didn't become bitter. He said, "All right, here I am. I'm going to make the best of this." And so he began to serve, as Frank was talking about. The best position to be in is when we're serving. That's actually the most powerful position. And Joseph was a great servant, so that the warden of the prison saw what a trustworthy person Joseph was. So he gave him little jobs to do. And he did this well, and he did that well. And he gave him more and more and more responsibility, just like the Bible says, until Joseph was in charge of the whole prison. And the warden took off and played golf every day. Because he trusted Joseph. It was in good hands. And so then the Lord, we're going to see later that the Lord gives Joseph another promotion because he was faithful in a little thing. Then God puts him in charge of all of Egypt, the whole economy of Egypt as they went through boom and bust, good times and recession, or depression actually. And Joseph was able to handle that because he had mastered the little things. And I wonder, what's the little thing that God has given you to do? What's that responsibility that he's put you in charge of? And you may think, that's, I sure wish I had more responsibility. But I just got this little job, so I'm not going to really do a very good job of that. Well, no, we need to do well at what God has given us, and then he gives us more and more. All right, I want to give you an example of a person. And it has to do with sports. I apologize for that ahead of time. But some of you know the name Jonathan Smith. Let me just tell you about him. He was a kid out of California, and he wanted to play football in college. And he looked at all the colleges, and nobody was offering him a scholarship. Because, most of these guys that you watch on TV, their school is all paid for, and they get a certain amount of money each month to live on. They get their room and board is all paid for. And there's about 85 of these guys on, the University of Oregon, Oregon State, Washington State. They're kind of like paid players. But he wasn't one of them. He wasn't deemed good enough to be on a scholarship. And so he decided he would just walk on to what they call a walk-on. That's where you just go out for the team, and hopefully they think that you're good enough to let you on the team. Well, this Jonathan Smith came to OSU several years ago as a freshman, and they said, well, we can't give you a scholarship, but yeah, you can be on the team and you can practice with the team. You'll probably never get in a game, but just practice with the team. Well, he did. And he did a good job with being on the scout team, where all they did was in practice run the plays of the other team, the opposition. But he did a good job of it. And so he didn't play at all his freshman year. They call it a red shirt. It's just a fancy name for you never got in any games. And so it doesn't count against your eligibility. But his second year, a couple guys got hurt, and so they said, hey, let's give this Jonathan guy a chance. So he got in a game, and just kind of like Joseph here, God blessed him, and he started to do well. The team picked up. They were doing pretty good. And so for the next 4 years, he became the quarterback at Oregon State. Now, this has been years ago. And in his junior year, they had the best record that Oregon State has ever had. They won 11 games, only lost one, and they won the Fiesta Bowl at the end of the year. And at the end of the year, they were rated the number 4 team in the nation under this walk-on, Jonathan Smith. Now, after college, he knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to be a football coach. But again, nobody was interested in giving him a job as a football coach. And so he became what they call a graduate assistant at Oregon State, because they knew him. And so a graduate assistant basically works for minimum wage. And you can take classes at the college if you're working toward a master's degree or something else. And so that's it. He did that for 2 years at Oregon State. And finally, after 2 years, the University of Idaho offered him a job, a paid job, as coaching quarterbacks, because that's what he played in college. And he was there for 5 or 6 years, University of Idaho. Now, they're not a very big school. In fact, they're not even in Division I anymore. They used to be, but not anymore. So it was and if you've ever been to Moscow, Idaho, I've been there, and it's in the middle of nowhere. It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. And so anyway, he was stuck there for 5, 6 years. And then from there, he went to the big city of Missoula, Montana. The University of Montana hired him, and there they made him the offensive coordinator. And so he was there for a couple of years. And then he went to Boise State, another small school out in the middle of nowhere, but it was a step up.
No, it's not. It's in the middle of Boise.
Oh, it's in the middle of Boise, okay. Yeah, so it was a promotion. It really was. And he spent 4 years there. And then he went, his coach was successful there, and so his coach got hired at the University of Washington in Seattle, big time now. And his coach liked the job that he was doing so well that he made him the offensive coordinator at University of Washington. You see what's happening here? He's getting more and more responsibility as he goes along because he did a good job in a little place, in a little thing, and God kept giving him bigger things. Well, then a few years ago, the job at Oregon State came available, where he had played, the head coach. And they hired him as the head coach. And you think, wow, what a big promotion, but it really wasn't. Because at the time, if you'll recall, Oregon State hadn't won a game in like 2 years. And the coach that they had before quit in the middle of the season because he was so discouraged. And so Jonathan Smith was hired to take this job at Oregon State, and he had the reputation, the grand title of being the lowest paid coach in the whole league. So welcome to Oregon State. But you know what? He took players that nobody wanted, and he began to build his program. And they began to have a little bit of success. They won a couple games his first year. And then the next year they did a little better, and the next year a little better. Now I think he's in his 5th year, and now Oregon State is tied for the lead in their league. Tied along with University of Oregon, who's a perennial power, has played for the national championship. So anyway, all this to say that as we are faithful in little things, God gives us more and more responsibility. All right, number 4, the main lesson of the prison test for Joseph was to hang in there when the going gets tough. And the Bible has a word for it. It's called perseverance. Perseverance, yeah. And Romans 5 talks about that. In verse 3 it says, "We also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance. And perseverance produces character, and character produces hope." Now those are a lot of words that we don't usually talk about much. Tribulation, you know what that means? That's when bad things happen to us. Have you ever had tribulation? Yeah, I think we all do. You don't even have to pray for it.
No.
It will find you if you're like me. But so bad things happen to us, but perseverance is just hanging in there even when bad things happen. That's called perseverance. And then the next step, if we have tribulation, that leads to perseverance, and that builds character. Builds character. You know what character is? It's life lessons we learn so that we don't do stupid things again. Have you ever done anything stupid? No, none of you have, I know. But I did one time. No, several times. But and my sister is here. She might be able to remember this. When we were growing up, we lived just up the street here in a house where it's not called Jay's Restaurant anymore. I'm not sure what it is. But there was a house there, and we lived there.
The grain station.
The grain station, yeah. And so someone told me, I was about 7 or 8 years old, and somebody told me, a little more background, we had a thermometer hanging in the kitchen. And it would tell you, 70 degrees or 68 or 72. So I'd look at that thermometer and see what the temperature was. Those days we didn't have air conditioning, so in the summer it would get up in the 80s in the house, and you'd kind of check that. And so I was fascinated with this thermometer, but somebody told me that if you take a match and hold it up to the thermometer, that little red line can go up and down. And so I thought, wow, that's cool. Maybe I should try that. And so I did. I found a book of matches, and when no one was looking, the whole family was out watching TV, I snuck into the kitchen with that book of matches. And I lit the match, and I put it there next to the thermometer, and sure enough, that red line started to go up. And I quickly blew the match out, and thought, wow, that's cool. And so the next night I came back and did the same thing, and I did this for 3 or 4 nights until one night I held the match there too long, and the thermometer burst open, and mercury fell on the kitchen floor and went all over. And there was no way to clean it up, so I had to confess to Mom and Dad that I had done something really stupid. And so I learned immediately from that, I don't think I'll do this again. I've never done that again. And I kind of learned don't play with matches, firsthand. So we all do stupid things, but if we can learn from them, that builds character. And then as we build character, that brings hope. You know what hope is? Hope is this. Hope is the peace and confidence that we have that God has brought us through the worst, and He can bring us through anything, and we will be a better person for that. Now, can anybody remember the worst thing that ever happened to you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know what? Our minds go right to it. We don't have to stop and think, let's see, was that the worst thing? Or was this, no, we know the worst thing, right? Let me ask you another question. Did God bring you through it?
Yes.
Yes, He did. And were you a better person for it? Yeah, if we thanked God for it and we didn't become bitter, you actually became a better person for it, right? And so hope is knowing that we've gone through the worst thing and God brought us through it, that we can go through anything and God will bring us through it. That's what hope is. And it all starts with bad things, tribulation. And that brings hanging in there, and that brings life lessons, and that brings hope. All right. So this is what was happening with Joseph. He'd been through a ton of bad stuff. He'd been through some really bad stuff, but it was building hope in his life. All right. About 10 years ago, we went through some tough times. It was tough financially. Remember the housing crisis, and people were losing their houses. And we were about ready to lose the house that we had built ourselves because we still owed money on it, and times were tough. We weren't able to keep up all the time with our payments. But you know what? We hung in there. We didn't know why. We didn't have all the answers, but somehow we just kind of hung in there. And I'll always be grateful to this church because during that time, this church hired me as the associate minister for $500 a month. And that $500 a month helped us to be able to weather that storm and persevere and make it through that. And so I'm totally grateful for that. God was able to bring us through those tough times. And so, who knows what the future holds, but we have confidence now that we've been through that, and so we can go through anything. So anyway, there are several people we could look at because Joseph got in. We think that sometimes maybe Joseph was only there for a couple years. He was there for at least 10 years and maybe 13. Because we know that he was 17 when he got sold into slavery. And I'm assuming that he worked for Potiphar for 2 or 3 years to kind of build that business up and be successful. But then he didn't take over in Egypt, we're told in Scripture, until he was age 30. So there were another 10 years there. Where was he? He was in prison. And this was a prison that people didn't get out of. And there would be a tendency to lose hope. Have you ever had to wait for something for a long time and it seemed like it was never going to happen and you were tempted to quit and just give up? Well, I'm sure that was true with Joseph, but he did hang in there. All right, number 5. While we wait for God to deliver us from tribulation, we will be tempted to use manipulation to fulfill our destiny. And when we do, this delays our waiting time. God never rewards manipulation. And so you remember that Joseph met the butler and the baker and the candlestick maker. No, the butler and the baker. And they were in prison. They were thrown in prison because apparently someone had tried to poison Pharaoh. And they didn't know exactly who it was, but they knew, they kind of traced it back to it was either came out of the kitchen or it came out of the butler. He was the cupbearer. He was the guy that brought the drinks to Pharaoh. And they knew it had to be one of these two guys, and they couldn't figure out who, so they threw them both in prison while they tried to figure it out. Have you ever done that with your kids? They're fighting, and you don't really know who was guilty, and so you just give them both a timeout. Or you take the toy away and you put it away up high, so nobody's going to play with it if you can't get along. So that was kind of the situation here. And then they had a dream. Both of them on the same night had different dreams. And Joseph was in charge of them. And so he said, hey, I can interpret these dreams. And so the butler told Joseph his dream. And Joseph said, oh, that one's easy. In 3 days, you're going to be set free. And you're going to get your job back serving the Pharaoh, being the servant. And everything's going to be great. And the baker said, well, hey, I had a dream too. Well, give me a good interpretation. And Joseph said, oh, your dream is that in 3 days, you're going to have your head cut off. Yeah. So apparently the baker was the guilty party, and that wasn't such good news for him. But here's what Joseph said to the butler, because he knew he was going to be set free. Genesis 40, it says, "But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh. Get me out of this house, for indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me into this dungeon." You see what Joseph was doing? He was kind of working an angle. Hey, drop a hint. Tell Pharaoh that I'm a good guy and I'm innocent. You know, Brad told me that almost every prisoner that he had was innocent. So, you know, everybody's heard that before. Sure you are. And so the butler, he got his job back, and guess what? He forgot. Wah, wah, wah. And so Joseph had to wait longer, and another 2 years. And 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream, and he can't figure out what it means. And a light bulb goes off in the butler's head, and he says, "Hey, I know a guy that can interpret dreams. He's in prison. His name is Joseph." And Pharaoh says, "Get him out here." And so, now let me ask you this. Who gave Pharaoh that dream? God, right? God gave Pharaoh that dream. Why did he wait 2 years? Why didn't he give it to Pharaoh 2 days? When it was fresh in the butler's mind. He could have, right? Joseph could have gotten out a lot sooner, but here's what was going on. Joseph was doing a little manipulation. And so I'm sure that God was watching over the whole thing. And this is speculation on my part. It doesn't say this in the Bible. But I believe that God was watching this thing, and he was saying, you know, I think Joseph's ready. He's been through all these tests, and he's got character now. And he's got perseverance. He's ready to go serve the king. And then, no, he's trying to manipulate things. And God never rewards manipulation. And so he said, there's still a few rough edges, and let's wait a couple years. And so, you know, that happens to us. God's waiting. He loves us so much, he's not going to put us in a position to fail because we don't have the character yet to manage the situation. But if we are patient and if we will follow his ways, then he is faithful and kind. All right. What are you waiting on the Lord for? Are you in sort of a prison? And you know, you're anxious to get out, and things just aren't going the way you wanted them to go, and you kind of feel like you're just treading water. What is that thing in your life? I know what it is in mine. Would you turn that over to God?